It seems like just when we've got life balanced and good practices in place as parents, something always changes. Maybe the discipline strategy for our third grader suddenly doesn't seem so effective once they hit later grammar school or even middle school years, or the routines that we put in place last year are now replaced with totally different and more consuming schedules and demands. But here's the good news. In the ever-changing challenges of raising children in the modern moment, as parents and as educators, there are timeless truths to anchor us. Join us for this episode of BaseCamp Live as we find practical ways to hold fast to true truth while navigating life's unavoidable changes.
Mountains. We all face them as we seek to influence the next generation. Get equipped to conquer the challenges, summit the peak, and shape exceptionally thoughtful, compassionate, and flourishing human beings. We call it Ancient Future Education for raising the next generation. Welcome to BaseCamp Live. Now your host, Davies Owens.
Welcome to another episode of BaseCamp Live. Hard to believe it's 2025. Wow, things have moved along fast. This makes it our 8th year doing the BaseCamp Live podcast. Thank you for so many of you who have listened for many, many years. And for those of you who are brand new, we welcome you to this conversation we have each week as we explore what it's like to raise the next generation to what does feel like at times the top of Mount Everest. And we need to stop at these base camps and get recharged, get equipped, and get encouraged as we go on this journey together in this big community and the opportunity to join together around the world. It's so encouraging. Reach out to me, info@basecamplive.com. Love to hear where you're listening from. A couple shout outs. First of all, to Jeff Johnson, headmaster at the Bradford Academy in Melbourne, North Carolina, as well as Nathaniel Pullman, headmaster at Redeemer Classical School in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Just shout outs to both of you as leaders and to your teams and your parents as well. We are so grateful that you're part of the BaseCamp Live and Zipcast communities. We have a lot of things exciting to announce coming up in 2025. We'll share those with you later around BaseCamp Live, new things we're going to be doing here on the podcast. And of course, Zipcast 2.0 is going to be coming out for the next school year. There's a lot there and a lot of fun stories we'll be telling you about as well. But for this conversation, I get to sit down with my good friend, Scott Barron, known Scott for years. He has been in educational leadership for 21 plus years. He was a founder of School Growth with a real heart to walk alongside school leaders and just encourage them in that daily process of raising the next generation. He considers himself a man of, I love this, intelligent faith. He loves creating and sharing books and messages, presentations. He's a fellow podcaster. And he creates lots of very helpful content to encourage educators to just persevere in their calling. He's been in many roles as school head. He's served on boards of schools, and he speaks around the country to thousands of educators and audiences really around the world. So it's a joy to get to have this conversation with Scott and have you be a part of it. Before we get to the interview, just a quick shout out as always, a thank you to the sponsors for this episode, Classical Academic Press, Gordon College, Wilson Hill Academy, the Classic Learning Test, and Life Architects Coaching. We are grateful for you and the resources you provide. You can check out more of these great organizations and their helpful resources and tools on our partnership page. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Mr. Scott Barron. Well, Scott Barron, welcome back to BaseCamp Live.
Oh, my pleasure, Davies. Love working together with you and your team.
I know we've known each other for a long time. It's good to reconnect it here on this for this conversation. I got to get Scott back on. I know you've been here before.
Well, love what you do in your ministry.
Well, I appreciate that, Scott. Give folks a little background on kind of your story. And you've obviously been Christian education for many, many years and seen a lot of, seen it from so many perspectives. But share a little bit of the Scott Barron story.
Well, I was involved in education technology for several years, and then I made this deal with God one night in 1997, and all of a sudden, a few months later, I'm running a school, and it was not part of my career trajectory plan at all, which speaks to the idea that you have to be careful what you pray for, but also, you be ready, because if you make yourself willing to follow what God's got for you, you may end up doing things you totally are unprepared for and have to kind of go back and learn, right? And that's what I love about what you're doing here on the platform is we all have to learn. And that's what I've been doing. I served as a head of 3 different Christian schools for about 14 years. And then the last dozen years, we've been working with schools around the United States, in North America, around the world, really solving for those spiritual, cultural problems, right? What are the things that are keeping us from being able to really fulfill our mission and to be able to change lives at the level that we really want? And usually that's tied up in those interpersonal issues, right? It's those things that even, having grown up as a preacher's kid, I've been around a lot of ministry people and times and situations, and even among Christians, we often pick fights with each other. I don't know if you've noticed that in your path.
Our fallen nature doesn't go away when salvation.
It doesn't go away, right? Salvation does not give an exemption from personality conflicts or other spiritual battles and other things. And so I think that's one of the things that's been a privilege of our work, is being able to minister to those who are called to lead schools and those who have been gifted with that precious gift to teach. Could we create an environment for them to practice their craft in a way that's not in a dysfunctional system, right? Because man, it's so many times it seems like our schools are so profoundly committed to dysfunction, and we got to stop that, because there's no joy in that. It makes it so much harder to practice this gift of teaching and leading. And so that's what our commitment is doing that among Christian schools and other schools as well, just giving them a pathway to really greater joy and love in the work.
Well, I love that you're doing that. And you're right. I think there's sometimes almost harder being in a Christian school and Christian environment, because we come in with even rightfully higher expectations. And I think so we have probably further to fall when things don't go right, because we expect everything to be, all full of love and grace constantly, and everything's perfect. I'm like, you expect that down the street at the secular school, but at the Christian school, well, how do we navigate all that? So
let me know when you find that.
I think that's called Heaven Academy or something. We'll get there.
That's what I like to say, is that our Christian school, it's a Christian school. It's not heaven.
Yeah.
Right? We've not been perfected yet. And so we have to allow the leeway for adjustments and learning and growth.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's always, what was the old church thing? Churches are supposed to be more like hospitals for the wounded than, holy places for the saints. So I think it's the same notion. And part of what I know we're going to jump into here is just really the fact that things change. And I think part of it sometimes is that those early, whether it's the early years of a pioneer startup school, you see it in sort of the school cycles where those early days, which are often romanticized when people look back, they're actually pretty grueling if you're trying to start a school and everything's so perfect. Well, it probably wasn't. Or you just have changes that happen in yourself and your children. Talk about that a little bit, kind of introduce that idea, because I think it's kind of obvious, but it's not. I mean, we tend to, I think, especially as Christians, because we hold on to Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and there's nothing new under the sun. And so, wait a minute, things are changing. So what's going wrong? Help us understand that.
I think one of the most important things that I have learned, both as a parent, as a grandparent, and as an educator, as a school administrator, is, hey, we don't live in a steady state. Right? I mean, this is a parenting truth that it's actually really important for us to get our head around and to process and to think about. We don't operate in a steady state. And of course, what that means is a steady state is a condition in which all the variables are predictable. They're constant over time. And so we can really kind of map things out and know what's going to happen. And this is used in a lot of different areas of science and production and other things where there are predictable states, right? We do not live in a steady state. Instead, we live in what is called a transient state, right? Where the variables of the system are changing over time. And usually in a system that we're eventually trying to get to equilibrium. As a parent, forget about it. You're not getting to equilibrium. It doesn't happen. You're constantly dealing with a changing set of variables. And in some ways, there's a peace in that. You learning, and this goes back to Reinhold Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer, right? There really is a bit of there's a real intelligence and a wisdom, but also a sanity in being willing to accept the things you cannot change. I mean, really, being able to accept the things that you cannot change. We kind of blow past that and say, yeah, okay. But no, really, you're not living in a world where everything is supposed to be the way you think it is. And sometimes as parents, we get it in very stressful situations because we see these models of whatever is proposed in social media or in other forums where there's like this ideal, and then we're trying to live up to what is supposed to be. And right. I think there's a freedom and understanding. There is no supposed to be. It is what it is, as my friends in Texas say, right? It is what it is. So learning how to accept that is very powerful. And I think it does lead to a greater sense of peace and joy.
Yeah. And it's one of those, again, I think everybody at face value would say, sure, I know that's true. And then in reality, you don't know what to do with it. And it seems like,
right.
It plays out in so many ways where whether it's, the way you parented your firstborn and then the secondborn is not the same. So
same gene pool sometimes.
I was like, wait, that didn't
completely different.
Right. Or I've seen it as an administrator. I mean, so many examples. It's just help me think through these examples. Or an example of, we sweet little girls that were all wonderful in early grammar school. And then all of a sudden 5th grade hits and the 5th grade girl problem, as I used to call it, what's going on there?
Who is this child, right?
Yeah, hormones are hitting and then it becomes, who do we take the blame to? And this, again, is the road to where friction and brokenness happen because it's like, that parent, teacher's not doing their job managing stuff and therefore.
That's right.
And
it's interesting, right? That we come into this, again, assuming sometimes a steady state. But when we learn to accept the fact that it's not just a transient state. I call it an uber dynamic transient state. That's what parenting is, right? You got to put a little uber in there, right? It's an uber dynamic transient state. The variables are constantly changing. But that's no different. I mean, if you think about, for example, let's take Steph Curry, right? For the
sure.
famous NBA player, amazing shooter, right? Well, Steph Curry, when he goes to start a game, he doesn't just kind of put the uniform on, lace them up, and then grab the ball. Okay, let's go, right? He goes and shoots sometimes 300 to 500 shots before every game, right? Now, if you think about that, why, right? Because what's not changing for Steph Curry? Well, the height of the rims aren't changing; they're set. The boundaries around the court, they're the same, right? The balls aren't changing. Well, maybe they are, right? I mean, because they change based on different elevations. People may have different types of balls they're using, right? So he has to the way the wood floors are made. It changes. There's certain soft spots, and they have to find out where those soft spots are. And they have to, but he's also going through a lot of change himself, right? His mindset is different every day. His mood is different. His muscles, his oxygen levels, his rest, the area, the environment around it, the competition, the crowd, the floor, everything is, even the enforcement of the rules. Well, they're changing, right?
I think I don't know why I remember this random stat from science class years ago, but it was like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 300 billion cells change in our body every day. So I mean, basically, like as I'm looking at
that's what we're talking about.
There's literally nothing that I'm seeing that was here, a year or two ago. Like your entire cells, or your body does this too. So to your point, so not only your moods change, but just things are different. Variables are happening. And so
that's right. Yeah. And the problem is if we go into this assuming a steady state, and we do, we assume coming into, sometimes we even assume, an example again is we assume that the same kid that we drop off is the same kid that their behavior and what they do at home is the same as they do at school. And yet I've seen so many parents go, my kid did what? That's not and then they have a chance to observe their child like in a without being seen. And they're like, who is that kid? I don't even, right? Because the variables change, right? And so being able to accept that your child is constantly changing and you are constantly changing.
And it's not, it's a negative, and it can be a negative, but it's just how we are as humans. I mean, we tend to interact, like to your point, it's not that my child is, manipulative and dishonest. Right. It's just they're with their peers and they're in a different setting. And so
it's a different context.
There's different, different pressure points, different opportunities, things are moving. And so, that's
different kids are wired differently. Some respond to that and they maintain a state, and others, They are very adaptive to their situations. And so they have to figure out how to navigate that world. And again, they're processing it themselves. And that's the key thing, is that as parents, right? You as a parent, you are changing physically. You are going through physical changes every day. Like you said, the cells are constantly in motion. Mm-hmm. They're changing. Spiritually, you're changing. Hopefully you're growing and developing the disciplines of spiritual growth. Physiologically, emotionally, interpersonally, habitually, we're constantly changing.
Right.
And it's vital to keep that in our minds, that everything that we see, we don't, and here's the message, we don't know what we don't know. Parenting requires a humility in working with your child, a humility in working with your spouse, a humility in working with your educators. Right. You don't know what you don't know. They don't either. But when we can agree to that, and we can agree to then learning together, it changes things. It changes the nature of the relationship.
Well, and I think you were talking earlier just about there's so many pressures that parents are feeling more than ever today, that sense of, whether it's mom guilt, there's dad guilt, there's just the FOMO, there's a sense in which I'm barely getting it done here. And now you're telling me when I clean that room up, it's a disaster again. I got to start all over again. So on the one hand, it can sound very, it's very discouraging, because you just feel like I'm trying so hard. Are you talking about Steph Curry out there? It's like, wait a minute. So the lines on the court moving, and the height of the goals changing. So there's some things that are not changing. So why don't we take a break and come back? Because I think that really the hope comes from, what are the things that are not changing we can hold on to, and then where do we show grace to ourselves and others with things that are changing? So it's just, in some ways it's so basic, in other ways, boy, we all get caught in this every day. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and unpack this a bit more. I want to take just a moment during our break and let you know about the great work that's being done by Wilson Hill Academy. They offer a vibrant, rich, and accredited classical Christian education available to families and schools almost anywhere. With a click of a button, students join master teachers and friends live online from all over the world to engage in deep and lively discussions, solve math problems, conduct science experiments, translate Latin, deliver thesis presentations, and so much more. At Wilson Hill, students make lifelong friends and graduate well-prepared for college and beyond. Discover what's possible for your family or school at wilsonhillacademy.com.
Hi, this is Dr. Christopher Perrin with Classical Academic Press. Grammar is a critical tool for a student's development that enables them to write, read, and speak with clarity, brevity, and precision. The Well-Ordered Language series from Classical Academic Press is designed for grades 3 through 7, and it will kindle the curiosity of students to learn and understand the structure of language, how it works, enabling them to order and enjoy language, all language. Visit classicalacademicpress.com and use the discount code BaseCamp_live to save 20% off your next purchase.
Scott, there's so many things in the world that swirl around us. It's a blessing, certainly, to be a believer and know that there are truths that are unchanging. I think it's just hard, as you're describing, like, what are the things we cling to that are not changing, and what are the things we just need to relax a little bit because they are going to change? And sort of sometimes we get that upside down, and we're holding on to the things that are changing and not holding on to the things that are unchanging. So what's some wisdom on how to navigate that?
Well, one thing that we reiterate a lot in as we're working with education leaders and teachers and parents is, hey, don't forget those 4 stages of learning. And we're all in them. We're all in different stages. And the way that I relate this is, if you ever have had to teach a child how to drive, right? They've turned 15 or whatever, and now they're trying to learn how to get behind the wheel, and you've got to trust them and teach them all these things that you do so naturally that you've forgotten what it's like to have to think about it. Right. And so there's 4 stages, right? There's the unconscious incompetence, where we don't know what we don't know. And that requires a humility to really listen. And even in your relationship with your child, as well as with your teachers and others, being willing to go back to that starting point and acknowledge that I don't know. And it's okay to not know. I don't have to know everything, right? There's a freedom in that. And then, but being committed to then move through to that second stage of conscious incompetence, where we then realize what we don't know and we start to develop that, just like that child driving. Now they start to realize, oh, I now have to look ahead. I have to anticipate. I have to have all these things going on with my feet and my hands and my head and my eyes. And I mean, there's just constant sort of now data I'm collecting and I'm having to make decisions. Yeah. And then I move to conscious competence, where now I'm practicing it. Okay, I got it. Here we go. Right. And then I move to unconscious competence eventually, where now I'm back into a mode of I do this very naturally. The hard part again is because of everything changing so much, we have to be comfortable with going back to that humbling state of unconscious incompetence. I don't know, David, you probably know this from your experience as an administrator, but some of the highest maintenance, or the families that often require the most work from school administrators are oldest or onlys, right? It's when the oldest or only child is coming through because they've never been through these stages before. They've never had to learn how to navigate all these things, and their child often is very different from them. And so now they're having to learn how to navigate this and figure it out. And there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of tension right. And so that ability, to have a humbleness to say, I don't know, and it's okay not to know, and be able to work with the folks around you. We'll talk later about feedback loops, but that's a critical part of navigating through those stages is feedback loops. Just like you do with your child when they're learning to drive, you're giving them feedback. Oh, stop, right? Turn here, you need your signal, all this stuff, right?
Well, that's
feedback loops are critical.
Well, I think, again, to the point you're making about just ages and stages, and if you've got that firstborn coming through, I mean, just look at, Kevin Leman and others have written books, like on birth order. He's well known for that book. I mean, we know this. We know that by that
100%.
That third child comes along, we tend to parent a little differently. We tend to parent more casually, just because things that we once thought were going to be the end of the world, we're like, that's just not going to be a big deal. They're going to get through it. I'm going to get through it. We're going to move on. But you don't have that perspective on that, which, as we get into some of the, here in a moment, talking more about just the practical side of it, as I speak and connect with schools around the country, and often we'll do kind of informal focus groups with parents. And one of the questions I ask is just, how do you know how to parent? Where are your parenting role models? And so much of what we know, both statistically and just realistically today, is that families don't live near extended family. There's not that generational wisdom that was once there.
Exactly right.
Grandma going, hey, that's okay. So they will say to me, well, I either go Google my way through parenthood and try to find answers, which is, fraught with who knows what's going to pop up. Or I phone a friend and I try to talk to, somebody who's got a child maybe a little older than mine that can kind of say, how did you guys get through this? But which is good to do, but everybody's clamoring for that. What's normal? Is this normal? Is that normal? So that seems to be the big part of the problem, is getting that answer.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And there's also, I guess, this is where parenting does require, being anchored. What gives you the ability to accept the things you cannot change is a faith. Right. It's a faith, remembering that, Hebrews 13:8 promises, hey, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Right. And that's a promise that we can hang on to. That's what gives us the grounding. The grounding isn't in ourselves because we're changing. The grounding isn't in our own wisdom because we don't know what we don't know. Right. But we do have that hope and that promise. That's not a subtle promise. It's James 1:17 said the same thing, right? Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Right? That's our anchor. And when we're unanchored, that's when we typically see behaviors that are way too emotional, overreacting. We see that unfortunately that term Karen comes out in us, right? I feel sorry for all those named Karen, right? Because that name is just obliterated now.
Yeah.
But there is that outrage that we kind of default to today, and it comes from forgetting, hey, listen, we're not perfect. We don't have those everything that righteous understanding, but we do have a Father who is. And I think that's a critical part of parenting is you got to stay anchored.
Right. And knowing that your identity is not based on your performance, which I think is I think that's, I mean, really what's going on in the minds of so many parents. I know when I've told this story when I was young dad, firstborn, Hannah had come along. I think she was probably 2 or 3, in the grocery store cart at the grocery store, working, going up and down the aisles. And, I turned for just a second and turned back, and she had grabbed whatever it was, the cereal boxes, and about 10 of them are on the ground. And people are turning to look at, who is this incompetent father who, his child is going crazy in the store. And I'm immediately, I found just, anger welling up in me. And I was like, wait a minute, what am I had to take a breath, because I was more upset about what people were thinking of me than I was that she was really acting out, in the sense that that's just what you do when you're that age and you've got something there, you reach out and touch it and it falls and something happens. And so, but I think that's that very narrow line we walk, which is, is this a case where someone really messed up and I need to discipline them and correct them? Or is this a case of I'm feeling shame because I didn't perform the way I expected to based on my own? So it's complicated sometimes sorting those emotions out, even if we know that God is the same and we know he's on his throne, but we're down here in the grocery store right now and there's some chaos breaking out.
100%. Well, there's a thing that there's a wisdom, right, that comes with that experience. And it's like you said, if you have multiple children, the older ones will say, "Wait, you didn't let me get away with that. What is going on around here?"
Slacker parents,
favoritism or whatever else, right? But there's also an interesting saying. This is, the young men know the rules and the old men know the exceptions. Right,
that's good. Yeah,
there is of course, there is a wisdom that comes with having gone through different cycles, different kids, right? And you learn to have more gray than black and white. And that's one of the things, I guess, that you have to have understanding as a parent that, you're living in that uber dynamic environment. You do have to have the ability to understand it's not all about the rules.
Right.
And sometimes, especially in relationship to schools, this gets very complicated, because there's the idea that, well, we should apply the rules all the same to everybody and everything. Well, there's always more to it than you know. And one of the hardest things about school leadership is sometimes there's a clamoring for a false ideal called transparency, right? As an educator, I can't be transparent with you as a parent. There's things that I know about other situations and families and the things that you just can't know. It's sometimes it would be unprofessional. Sometimes it would be even illegal to share a lot of this information about different situations. And so there's sort of this idea that, I have a right to know because I'm a parent, and that relationship has to allow for some variability. It has to allow for some decision making. Now, listen, a lot of educators make unwise decisions, and I'm not defending all education decisions, but the role that the educators play in relationship with the parents does require a give and take. It requires the ability to wisely navigate, negotiate in order to sustain a healthy relationship. One of the most damaging things that I see parents do to their children is to model an outrageous behavior that does not allow for listening and respect. And that's something that I wish schools would focus on more as well. I personally, as a school administrator, I could care less about student voice. Now, I know for some that would be an outrageous statement. I'm more concerned about wisdom. I'm more concerned about an understanding of truth. I'm more concerned about an ability to navigate different decisions, understanding that most of the world is not black and white. There's a lot of variability that God allowed, but also that we have to be able to navigate through, make the best decision we can and move forward. But it does sometimes devolve into some very unprofessional and immoral conflict that is allowed to linger.
Well, and at a basic level, just the structures of how communication occurs, I've said at times, if you were to think about, let's go create a new business model. I know, let's build this thing called a school, and we're going to work with little children who are constantly changing and get hormonal, and we're going to work with the customers called the parents, but we're never really with the parents. We just have the children become the ambassadors over this 13-year journey. I mean, what could go wrong? You're dealing with people's money and their children and their faith. And so,
and their time.
Yes. It'd be like being married, but you have like some little child that has to intercede between the two of you. And so it's just, no matter what, we've got to get that fixed, which means when something suspicious or concerning happens, to your point, do we just start ranting? Do we fire off an email, or do we actually make an effort? And this is, I think, the heart of the problem, because everybody's so busy or claiming to always be so busy. It's like, to make the effort to untangle these things, it's going to take some time to really work through the grays and the fuzziness at times. And that's hard, but it's necessary, or else we just get sideways really fast and cancel or do whatever the modern world does. Yeah.
That's right. And that's not unique to schools.
No,
right? That's true in any organization.
Right.
It's just in the schools, like you're saying, schools are quite different in the sense that it's the emotional ecosystem that makes up a school. And that changes pretty much everything.
And then again, as classical or as classical Christian, but it's certainly any Christian educational endeavor biblically is operating in an understanding that the parent is the primary discipline provider, authority. I mean, that's God set up the parent to be in that role. So it's weird. Like, wait, who would set this structure up where we're basically, as a school in loco parentis, working under the authority of the parent. But so even who's really in charge? Well, we're working it as a team, but it takes a lot of effort that we don't step on each other's toes.
Teamwork requires trust.
Yes, it does.
Right. And that's really that's where everything rises or falls, is our ability to generate and to sustain a high level of trust together. And most schools rise or fall based on that.
That's right. And it can change really fast. So let's take another quick break. I want to come back. You talked about feedback loops. I want to hear some thoughts on some best practices of how we can help guide ourselves and our schools and our children through the ever-changing world around us. So we'll be right back and continue the conversation. This episode of BaseCamp Live is sponsored by the Graduate Leadership Program at Gordon College, one of the nation's top Christian liberal arts colleges. Their program equips rising leaders in the classical Christian movement with the knowledge, skills, and relational wisdom to lead thriving schools. Earn your graduate degree in leadership in a 2-year hybrid program designed by classical leaders for classical leaders. Learn more at gordon.edu/graduate/classical. You choose a traditional education for a reason. So why use standardized tests that don't reflect that? BaseCamp Live is proud to partner with Classic Learning Test, which offers online academic assessments that strengthen a traditional education. CLT's assessments for grades 3 through 12 provide a meaningful metric of students' abilities, equipping parents and educators, and helping students pursue a fulfilling future. Explore CLT's assessments by visiting www.cltexam.com/Basecamp. So guys, we think about the practices that we could keep in mind each day as a parent in a world that is always changing and it's not a steady state. What are some other just best practices? You talk about feedback loops. Help us understand what those are all about.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for ways of validating, right? Because we have to go with the assumption that we don't know, we don't have it correct, right? And then because there's a saying about assumptions. It doesn't go very well, right? I mean, there's things that get us in trouble, right? And that's something that we have to be very aware of. And if you can use social media for feedback loops, you can use but that's dangerous because there's sometimes not shared values and shared principles and sort of practices as well. So we do encourage parents to be very intentional about, hey, finding those feedback loops that give you that motivation, that keep your spirits up, right? Because it's easy to get discouraged. Of course it is. It's easy to get worn down. There's a line that Lombardi said one time, right? That fatigue makes cowards of us all, and we get tired. We just came off of a break, and everybody's been at home, and now we're going back, and we've all shared all these germs together. We've gotten sick sometimes over the holiday, and now we're going back, and we're trying to get back in the rhythm of everything. And then the spring sports starting, get going, and then it's just this rapid, sprint in the United States here to the end of the school year. And so there's a lot of opportunities for conflict and for battles. So it is important to have that feedback loop that gives you motivation. It keeps your perspective, right? And that's the secret sauce, Davies, that I think is important for both educators and parents. Is it's all about perspective. Don't forget who you are. Don't forget that child is a temporary gift. Right. When you reflect back and remember, you've been through this, you've seen your children go through all the stages, and you look back and go, what happened? I mean, it's like it's over, right? And when they're gone, they're gone. I mean, it's a different deal. By the way, parenting is harder when they're 30 and 40 than when they're 15, just so you know. So,
You're never done. You're never done. Yeah.
It's even hard. Just trust me. It's even harder later on.
Right.
But those feedback loops for self-reflection, for adaptation, as well as, looking at, how do I learn? How do I stay fresh and know what's going on? Those are some of the things we kind of stress as a part of this. Just a couple of suggestions. One is find some folks who could be coaches and mentors. That's very scriptural, right? Where, sometimes the older women, more experienced women, counseling and providing feedback to younger women is important, and men as well. And having those feedback loops that we can kind of learn from each other. Sometimes we don't have extended family nearby, as you said earlier. And so finding other resources in your church or other places that can give you wisdom, can give you real feedback, and then having the humility to listen to it may not always be what we want, right? But to hear that feedback and then make adjustments. So that's one, coaches and mentors. Two is then peer feedback. Choose your friends wisely. It's just like with your kids, you become like who you hang around with. That's an inevitable part of our wiring. For whatever reason, that's the way God made us. And so you pick up the attitude, the habits, the mindset of those people that you spend time with. So choose your friends wisely. Find some people. Listen, pay them to be your friend if you have to. Whatever you have to do, right? Spend time with those people. It cannot be overemphasized of how important that is. And then continue to develop your self-intelligence. This is one of the things we found. That's the number one characteristic of high-performing educators, as well as the most effective parents, is they have a high degree of self-awareness. They know who they are, but they don't just know through their own sort of guessing, right? They actually use different mechanisms for feedback. They maybe use some types of evaluation, feedback loops, that kind of thing. But they really are developing a current understanding of who they are, of how they operate, how they think, and then they are conscious of, as they're growing, they're conscious of how they naturally think about things, or how they make decisions, or how they take action, and they don't try to kind of trump other people. They don't try to trump their kids, or when you say trump, I mean, they don't try to overwhelm them or kind of play that, that card that kind of wins everything, right? Instead, they're willing to encourage and build relationships with, and understanding those dynamics that are at play, and trying to listen. Every parent has to know your prayer life makes a difference. Your prayer life makes a massive difference. And so there was a spirit one time where Jesus said to the disciples, this one only comes out through prayer. Right.
Right.
And sometimes the challenges that you're running up against as a parent, sometimes you got to say, hey, I know you think you got this figured out. This one only comes out through prayer.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many, what a great summary of just this best practices. As you were kind of walking us through that, Scott, I was thinking about years ago when I was at Heritage in Atlanta, and I mentioned earlier, 5th grade girls. I just kept finding that to be a hot spot. But I just remember we had a situation where there was a lot of the sweet little girls in 3rd grade became other little girls in 5th grade. And so, but the way that was resolved is so beautiful, because the parents, in particular the moms, were getting together because they were in community, which again is one of the great joys of our schools, is that there is an opportunity for parent-to-parent deep community and engagement. And they got together and they just started, cross-communicating to make sure it wasn't just, the playing off families one to the next. And then they prayed together, to your point. And it really was amazing. Within just a few weeks, so much of that just settled down, and the girls kind of got realigned, and it was beautiful. But it only happened because the parents were willing to take the time to spend sorting out the issues, not blaming, having humility, praying about it. But it can be done. But you're right, it takes some intentionality. So,
yeah, 100%.
Well, Scott, thanks so much again for this conversation and for your time. For folks who want to know more about you and just the great work you do, how can they find out more about you?
Well, if they're looking, we do a lot of ministry to educators through schoolgrowth.com. That's where we provide a lot of training and guidance for administrators and other educators, and trying to figure out how to take that journey to authentic, sustainable excellence, right? It's one thing to talk about excellence. It's another thing to deliver on it on a day in and day out basis. Yep. And so we kind of provide, again, some of the feedback loops, some guidance, and some prodding to say, come on, let's go, right? So we try to really help them provide the best conditions to love and lead educators. And then through Educators Fellowship, it's edfellowship.org, we are really ministering to educators around the world. And so if someone there has a heart to see educators grow in both their calling to this work as well as in their faith, that's what we do. And so we provide a variety of different tools, conversations and content for educators in all fields. I mean, across the board, private, public, charter, international, wherever. We don't care. If they're involved in education, then we want to be a part of their journey, and just to be there, just to encourage them, and of course, challenge them in some of their spiritual development as well. And so that's our ministry through Educators Fellowship, and we'd love to have
fantastic
folks that want to be a part of that journey with us. Either if they want to just subscribe to our content on our Monday encouragement for educators, or even be a part of supporting some of the things we have planned for 25, 26, and elevating some of that ministry. That would be fantastic.
Sounds good. I'm so glad you're doing that. What an important role you're playing. It's just coaching, guiding, and supporting these critical work that happens every day all around the world in Christian education. Yes. Scott, thanks so much. Always good to have you on, and look forward to continuing conversations with you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for all you do, Davies.
One of the most frequent questions I hear from parents as I travel around the country is, at what age should I give my child a phone? I get the question. It's very practical and very important to be able to communicate with our children. And I think sometimes we think of it as an all or none. I won't give them any phone, or I'll give them a fully functioning internet-ready smartphone. There's a great solution that I'm a big fan of. It's the Light Phone, Light Light Phone. It's built by folks that want to help us find some sanity and the need for communication, which is very practical. The phone is very basic. It allows you to make phone calls, to do two-way texting. It does allow podcast and allows some map features. But really, other than that, what else do you need for communication? So it's a perfect tool for adults and children alike who just want to simplify and not have all the temptations of the full internet. Check out the Light Phone on our partners page, and I know that it will be a blessing to your family as it has been to mine. Well, you've done it. You made it through another episode of BaseCamp Live, and I sincerely hope that you've been encouraged along the way. Thank you for being such a faithful listener. And thanks again to America's Christian Credit Union, Classic Learning Test, Gutenberg College, and Wilson Hill Academy for sponsoring this episode of BaseCamp Live. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you're listening from. We would love to hear from you, and let us know what's on your mind, what questions you have. Email us at info@basecamplive.com. We really do appreciate you as a faithful listener. Take a moment and invite other parents and school leaders, anyone involved in raising the next generation, to listen to the podcast, and we will see you back here next week with another episode that you will not want to miss. Thanks again for listening.